Let me show you how I make a fully functional welt pocket step by step. For this particular pattern, we'll need 3 pieces: the pocket lining, the inner pocket facing, and the welt. Make sure the pile on the welt fabric matches the direction of the rest of the coat. Otherwise, when light hits it, the welt might look like it belongs on a totally different coat, which is not what we're going for. You can double check by applying it to the coat like this. Color should look the same. Also, the welt and facing are already interfaced. Don't worry about the different interfacing colors you see here, they are identical in weight, it's just what I had at hand. Lastly, the pocket lining is marked on the wrong side to avoid any mix-ups. One more time, we want to double, even triple check the pile is facing downwards on the right side of the welt. Actually, the first piece I had was cut incorrectly and had to be replaced, and I was lucky enough to have more fabric, but that's not always the case. Trim the seam allowances on the wrong side by scant 2 mm. Once we stitch along this edge, this will ensure the seams will stay hidden. Stitch along the edges, leaving a 1 cm gap at the bottom. You'll need this gap later. Next, it's time to debulk. Remove interfacing from the seam allowances, snip the corners, and press everything open and trim down to about 5 mm. Aim for a sharp corner here, but whatever you do, do not use scissors to push it out, like me here. Just trust me on this one. Once done, your seams will be perfectly concealed on the wrong side. We can now go ahead and top stitch. My machine is quite fussy when it comes to sewing with top stitching thread, and it took some trial and error until I got it to work properly and stop skipping stitches. Top stitch along the top edge only, 8 mm away from the edge, and leave 8 mm unstitched on both ends. Skip the back stitching. Instead, leave long threads to tie off and thread to the inside of the welt. I was lucky enough I found a top stitching thread that matches my fabric perfectly. If you're not so lucky, it's not a big deal, you can just use 2 regular threads at once, and the result will still look great. This is a good time to admire your work for a moment. It's one of my favorite parts. Align the wrong side of the welt with the right side of the pocket lining. Triple check that all the details are correctly positioned, as ripping out stitches after this stage is going to be a nightmare. Fold the seam allowance on the right side out of the way. Attach the seam allowance on the wrong side to the welt of the pocket lining. Accuracy is everything here, so take your time. I like to baste this step as well to keep everything stable. I find it easier to reach the seam line if I use the zipper foot here. Another trick I learned recently is to start 1 cm from the end, then backstitch that 1 cm and then sew as you usually would. This way the backstitching will be hidden inside and out of the way. Now it's time to attach this pocket assembly to the coat. Not sure which way it goes? Visualize the finished pocket, then work backwards. This always helps me. In our case, we want the pocket edge to face downwards, so pin, baste, and ensure everything is perfectly aligned. And this is going to be our stitching line. If you want to check one last time everything is where it should be, now is a good time. I'm using the zipper foot again, as it is just make it easier to reach. Repeat the same with the pocket facing. It will eventually align with the pocket lining, so it needs to be stitched along the top marked line. Again, this is where we want to be as precise as possible and make sure that the lines match absolutely perfectly. I basted it and then decided to baste it along the stitching line as well, just to prevent any shifting. You will notice two sets of lines marked with a pen on the white facing. The lines on the outer sides indicate where the pocket opening is, but we need our stitching line to be 2 mm shorter on each side so that it remains hidden from the right side. So we will be stitching from one inside line to the other. Double check that the stitching lines on the back are parallel and that the top line is shorter than the bottom, just like we mentioned. Once we are sure everything is in order, we can mark the cutting line like so. Here comes the most nerve-wracking part, cutting the pocket opening. Deep breaths. Make sure nothing is in the way, and maybe throw some salt over your shoulder for luck. Carefully cut the opening, which we will use to turn the whole construction inside out. Now that the worst part is over, separate the interfacing from the seam allowances and trim it away. This area has a lot of layers, so we need to keep it as clean and as neat as possible. Now the part we've all been waiting for, turning it all inside out. This is when we hold our fingers crossed yet again and hope we did all the steps correctly. Press open whatever you can, but go easy on the fabric. Overpressing can leave marks on the right side that are nearly impossible to fix. Clip into these corners to reduce bulk, but be aware of the stitching line. We don't want to clip into that. Stitch the little triangle bits at each corner to lock everything in place. A zipper foot will make it easier to stitch close to the edges. Once secure, it's starting to look like a proper pocket. To keep the seam allowances tidy, stitch them in place close to the original seam. Precision isn't critical here, but basting can help if you're worried. Again, zipper foot will be your best friend. Now, sew the pocket facing and lining together. Don't force the edges to align, as this can deform finished pocket. You can always trim the edges later. The seam allowance here is 1 centimeter. Almost there! Use invisible hand stitches to secure the welt in place, and then top stitch through all the layers for extra durability. Like with the top edge, we are going to top stitch 8 mm from the side. Ta-da! Our welt pocket is complete. Press the whole thing gently and take a moment to admire your handiwork. It is well deserved.